You're listening to the Faith Breathes Hope podcast, Accelerated Edition number 15. Today I speak with licensed counselor and grief healer of 12 years working with couples, individuals, and families, Katie Rossler, on natural ways of coping with grief. Welcome to the Faith Breathes Hope podcast, Accelerated Edition, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I am Christina Reisinger, and today you will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release your fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hey, Katie, how are you doing?
I'm good, Christina. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yes, and we are so excited to have you on Faith Breathed Hope. So the first thing I want you to do is tell the audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed counselor from the USA, but I live in Munich, Germany. And I'm also a grief healer. I have over 12 years experience working with couples, individuals, and families. Have had a private practice in the States, have a private practice here in Germany as well. And the Germany came about because I married a German man, and we've got 2 kids and 1 on the way. And my story with grief and loss is that in 2018, at the very end of the year, I lost my mom suddenly. And then the following year, we experienced 2 miscarriages. And so through those experiences, sort of my gifts and abilities as a grief healer and helping people move through their suffering and struggles really became almost even more awakened than they were before. Like I was able to really sit with people even more because of what I was going through and what I was experiencing. I needed to do a lot of my own grief work and continue to do because, as we know, grief, once you experience it, becomes integrated with you. It's part of our lives. But it really became this almost like I became a bowl to being able to sit with people's grief and the things that they were struggling with, and to be able to hold it and help them to sit with it as well, to not feel like they need to constantly escape it or run from it. And so really what we're going to focus on today are some natural ways to cope with grief, because often we try to run from it. We try not to feel it. We don't want to. And it makes it really difficult.
Definitely, yes. So she has already introduced her topic. The first thing, Katie, I actually want to ask you before we get started is, so you kind of laid something out there. You said that once, you had experienced your own grief, that it kind of changed the way that you dealt in your profession. Now, I and many other people I know, we actually entered into this grief area because of our experiences. Can you tell me a little bit about why you chose to work in grief before?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because when you become a counselor, you can't avoid it. There will be discussions about life challenges. There'll be discussions about grief. So we are trained in how to help people through what we're educated on are the phases or stages of grief and better understand them. But as we all know, once you go through it, it completely transforms the way we understand grief. And honestly, when I went through the experiences in 2018 and 2019, I started to reflect on my life and realize that grief was always prevalent. I grew up in a military family, so we were moving every 2 to 3 years. And so I got very acquainted with saying goodbye and detaching from things, but also the grief that comes with that. I started to realize that grief shows up when we go through our rites of passages, like going off to college, and we feel it. And we have that adjustment phase. Moving to a new country, that had its own grief with it. So grief was already occurring beforehand, like the work I did. But I would say me really saying, let me step out and really acknowledge the work that I do as a grief healer and helping people move that energy in them versus stay stuck, happened after the catalyst of losing my mom and having the 2 miscarriages. And often how this works when you really decide to step out and be a healer and do this work with grief like you're doing as well, is there is a catalyst. We find purpose and meaning through that loss, through that life challenge that then pushes us to give back, to help, to sit with other people through what they go through.
Yeah, and I have definitely realized that, through all my rites of passages where, initially I was going to be an addictions counselor as well. And so, when we lost our daughter, everything changed. And that's why I started working with people in the grief area as well. But we're not here to talk about that. We're going to talk about natural ways to move through the grief. And you have a whole bunch of things that you want to share with us. So how do you want to do this? Do you want to just kind of give us a list, or do you?
We can dive in. So I have a whole guide. So I only picked a few from each category that I think are really helpful, but I'll make sure you guys have the link to the guide to be able to get
Awesome.
it. So let's start with teas, because I find these to be the last thing I thought of in my grief. And as soon as I started to find different teas that helped in different phases of grief, it was a game changer. I mean, I still drink these teas now to sort of cope with stress and things that come. So a couple I want to bring to everyone's awareness is, the first one is Tulsi, or it's also called holy basil. So it tastes a bit like basil, but with a sweeter taste to it. And it's excellent for our digestion, which, let's be honest, when we're in grief, sometimes we're not eating the best. We're not really eating at all. And so it also helps with the immune system, our cardio support, and nervous system. So like if you think of a tea that's like what we need in a very stressful time, it's this one. But the best part about it when it comes to grief is it helps with the feeling of hopelessness. It creates this, so all the teas I'm talking to you about, and actually all the things I'm going to share today, are things that I've used. It really just, you feel this warmth in your heart. You feel this like, everything's okay. It calms the brain, it calms the heart. And it's really powerful. And I will attest to, it helps with digestion. It helps when you're like, oh, I ate too much. I've come from a Southern family, so that's like, we need this one in our lives. So another one that's wonderful, and I think extremely helpful is hawthorn leaf. And being pregnant, I will tell you, do not drink this in pregnancy. I don't drink it in pregnancy. It's from the rose family. So as we know, that's when you're ready to have the baby, you want to start drinking teas like that. It lowers cholesterol and high blood pressure. So think when you're, anxious, when you're holding on to the stress and it's raising your blood pressure. And it helps with the heartache and break feeling, because literally what it's doing is calming down your cholesterol and your blood pressure. So it literally is addressing your heart and cardiovascular system. So it's a beautiful one to help in just really releasing when you're feeling it in the beginning, especially. And then the last ones of the teas, because you and I had talked privately about what are ways to get energy, because often in grief, we don't always feel energetic. There are some of us who like dive in and fill our schedules to avoid, and then some of us who just can't get out of bed. So yerba mate is an excellent tea for this. A lot of people drink it instead of coffee. And it's really big in like Costa Rica, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay. It is a cerebral stimulant. So we're talking mental energy, memory, without the feeling like coffee where you're like, it's like the addiction to it. And, we get the drop after a coffee. It doesn't have that piece to it. So it's excellent for giving you that lift you want without the caffeine jitters that coffee brings. So those, I would say those would be the 3 teas I would say have in your cabinet. And there'll be more in the guide that you'll find. But I think those are the 3 that are most important for what we go through in grief.
Let me hop in here and ask you a question before we move any further forward with the tea. 2 things, and I'm sure that this is in the guide, but number 1, safety. Any kind of safety precautions, like pre-existing conditions, or is that just something that the people need to research for themselves or talk to their doctor about?
So like I said, with the hawthorn leaf, definitely not in pregnancy.
Yes.
The other ones, I did not find anything before drinking these that were, contraindicated, anything that you need to be aware of. But with any natural things, it's always good to just run it by your doctor. You will find, if you Google, you'll find pros and cons of everything. So what I find is I usually try to find either a holistic doctor, which you can find many of those online, and literally email them. And they'll for free tell you yes, no, easily. Many of them even have blogs that already address these things and they can share with you. But the only one where I found like, don't do it is pregnancy with the hawthorn leaf.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then in your guide, is there a place that say, I've never heard these, I don't, obviously we're going to see how to spell them. Is there a kind of suggestion of where to find them? Because I know at least a lot of products that are good naturally are not all created equal. And maybe you're going to get into this in a little bit, but some have a lot more fillers than others. So do you have a suggestion?
Right. So I buy all of this loose leaf. So I've got one of those teas that you can like put in the leaves into the center, and like one of the teas, lime blossom, it literally looks like it's just dried off of the stems and everything come with it, the little buds of the flower. But I always say only buy from certified organic stores and trusted stores. We all know somebody who is, I like to call them kind of like the granola mom or couple who knows these things. Ask them. Or if you reach out to, a holistic doctor, ask them as well. Because I'm in Europe, I can tell you the ones here. I honestly bought the ones that I've been using on Amazon, but from a trusted company that uses Amazon to sell. And that was why it was like, okay, this is what I want. Over here in Europe, they have very strict standards. So I knew what icons to look for and what specific wording to know were good and were safe. So I would suggest, asking around and doing some research. It's been over 4 years since I've lived in the States. So even if I was like, hey, I think these are good, you kind of never know, right? Like things shift so much. But that is research I could do and throw into the guide later on. The good thing about, I love these guides is that you can always update, what material is in them and make sure that everybody has that update. So yeah, always buy certified, organic, and from a trusted space.
Awesome. So what do we have next then, Katie? So we went through
Next
teas.
one. Yeah, let's talk about essential oils because that is like, even in Europe, everybody's doing it. So there are 3 areas I want to talk about. The oils that help with calming, because when we feel anxiety, when we feel the racing mind, all those things, it's important that we're aware of. I mean, we all know lavender typically. Chamomile we usually think about as a tea, but it's actually really great as an oil. And then the last is clary sage, but do not use that when you're pregnant. So these 3 oils to stimulate our ability to, and for the longest time, Christina, I hated the smell of lavender. And it wasn't until the last 6 months, I had a friend a year ago tell me, if you don't like the smell of something like that much, it's probably because you need it in your life. And I was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. There's a little bit too much out there. But then I realized I was so uncomfortable being calm. It made total sense.
Yeah.
And once I really heavily started getting into the grief work that I needed to get to, like the nitty gritty stuff, all of a sudden I really liked the smell of lavender. It was a weird click and change. So if you notice with the calming oils, you don't like them, probably what you need. It's probably that you do need to be calmer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that too. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So another oil that's that's important is the ones that help you ground. Now, when we're always in our minds, it's almost like we feel like we're levitating above our bodies. And sometimes this happens too in the shock stage of finding out information. And when we replay the traumatic experience, we feel like we're kind of out of our body. So grounding oils are like vetiver and cedarwood, the woodsy oils. And they just help you to, I'm using the word grounded because literally it's like planting roots back in the ground. Like, I'm here, everything's okay. They're really helpful, but they're very woodsy smells. So I like to, mix them with something floral or something that makes it a little less like, wow, it smells like bark. Is it now in my home? You want something that helps balance that.
I love cedarwood. I think it smells, it even smells sweet to me. I don't know. Maybe my body needs it.
And it's great with memory and being able to like focus. So it's
maybe that's what it is right there.
Yeah, and vetiver as well. The last one I want to address, because we forget to do this, is after you've cried and you can't breathe very well. We've all been there in our grief. Think about things like eucalyptus, peppermint, and lemon. These are great things to diffuse. Sometimes even with the eucalyptus, very carefully, I'll put a small amount right at the bottom of my nose, just so I'm really breathing it in. But with oils, what's happening in our society is like we're overusing them. We really don't need as much as we're putting on ourselves. That's why they're like, okay, mix them with almond oil or coconut oil, because you don't need so much. So really I lightly touch it with my finger and then dab around, and you can just get it's good for your lungs, good for your nose, opening up the passageways. So that really helps when you're not going to avoid the tears, you need the tears. But when we get into those big sobs where we can't breathe afterwards, it does help open up the nasal passageways.
Mm-hmm. And usually the oils like eucalyptus and peppermint and lemon, I believe they're supposed to be good for energy. And so we talked about that energy earlier on. But also I have found for certain people, at least for me, they're also calming. Like peppermint for me is such a pleasant smell that if I inhale it, it like just makes my entire body calm.
Yes, because it stimulates focus as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're focused, we're calm. We're in the zone. So that they're like, all of those are double-sided. They help you breathe and they help you focus. Yeah. So let's move on to some foods to be thinking about. So when we go through grief, our immune system takes a big hit. We want to sleep more, our memory is affected, and we tend to go into either lots of sugary foods or lots of salty foods. As a woman, I always address it. It's kind of like when you're PMSing and you're like, I just want sweet or salty. I just want sweet or salty. So what we know about that is like when you take in a lot of salty foods, you're also retaining a lot of liquid, which doesn't make us feel good. And this is something I want all the listeners to stop for a second and hear this. Depression is a symptom of inflammation in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So inflammation in the body, one of its symptoms is depression. Mm-hmm. So when we're eating salty foods and we're retaining that liquid and it creates sort of inflammation in us, we are adding to our feeling of sadness, hopelessness, loneliness. So why do we, when we talk about not suffering and grief, we have to be very mindful of how we're adding to it for ourselves. So some great, foods like mushrooms help with inflammation in the body. Stress relief, think about purples and red fruits and veggies. These are full of antioxidants that help us. So I know right after my mom died, I started doing a lot of like berry smoothies and acai and stuff. It was just like clear it out, clear out what's going on. Spirulina is great for clearing out the toxins. Often our body stores up all that stress, and after the funeral and the planning and whatever we're having to do, or the move and all these things, we need it cleaned out of our body. Now, spirulina is not good when you're pregnant because you don't want to detox when you're pregnant. But those purples and red foods are great no matter what. That's something we all need to be thinking about. Something I highly recommend as well, everybody, and I know health insurance is a big factor in this, but if you can get a food allergy and sensitivity test done, it's really important, because often we don't recognize, like just for example, I was diagnosed as lactose intolerant at 14. My whole life, I've thought all I needed to do is take the lactose-free pills, and I'm great. I can have whatever dairy, and I'll just have soy milk on the other days. And in the last year, I was able to go and get an actual test done. And I found out actually nobody had ever done the blood test. And then once I finally did it, I can't have the protein at all. It actually really messes with my system. But I was thinking it was something else I was eating, or, because I was taking the lactose-free pills. This is what, or lactose pills. This is what you're supposed to have. So when you get an allergy test done, you find out if there are other things that could be impacting your emotions, your memory, your sleep, on top of the grief. So if you're able to do that, I highly, highly recommend. And that will also help you know what foods your body really wants and really needs. So I think that's a huge recommendation that, just like I said, in the last year was like an eye-opener for me of like, whoa, when you really remove what your body can't digest well, or that you have an allergy to and didn't really realize, you take out a whole level of stuff that you thought was emotions or something with your memory, and it ended up being food related.
Yeah. So you're telling me I can't eat the cheesecake every day, right?
If you find out your body can't handle that, I believe
eat more grapes.
It's been a big, again, I've been able to have ice cream with a little pill, and now I'm like, whoa, but my skin is so much better. My mind is so much clearer, like everything. It was weird. Once I shifted that, I was like, wow, I didn't realize how much it was impacting me. So being aware of things that compound us in our grief. Grief will happen. We will feel sad. We will feel angry. We will feel all the phases, but we want to be aware of what can compound what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And have nothing to do with the grief,
Isn't that interesting how we can feel like when we eat to like stuff those emotions, and we take that sugar, that sweet, that salty thing that we feel is satiating, and we feel like it's kind of helping us deal with that grief. And in fact, maybe not right then in that moment, but in fact, it's building up that inflammation, which is causing additional distress. That's quite an interesting thought. Thank you for sharing that, Katie.
Of course. And play around with, with sugars. Like when I started being like, okay, I've got to be mindful, like dark chocolate in moderation, you're doing great. Like it's actually really good for our health. I found grapefruit. There was something about the sweet and sour of it that I, didn't want more than maybe a half a grapefruit, but I got the sweet craving out of my system. So you'll find things, maybe it's unsalted nuts or enough of that, that protein sort of that you need, that you stay away from the salty. You'll find the things that work for you, but you have to consciously say, I actually don't want to make myself feel worse, even though I think I'm comforting myself. It's like procrastination. We think we're saving ourselves from an uncomfortable feeling. I don't really want to do that, but we're actually prolonging it and making it a bigger monster under the bed by putting it off. Same with this. If we continue to eat unhealthy, we're just making the monster even bigger versus, hey, let me just take care of myself.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. What do you think about how much that, when you eat something and you don't feel well, like how much of that are you able to gauge? You think it really needs to come from a blood test because it is hidden? Because sometimes, you may eat something and you don't feel well. For me, milk is not always my best bet, or curry. Even I love the taste of it, but it does not like me. So, but you're saying that, even though we are becoming increasingly aware as a society, as people, that we need to be attentive to the foods that we eat, we may not know something that we're eating that we feel is doing our bodies good could be a culprit and actually making us feel worse.
Yeah. So here's an example. I thought rice for the longest time was like really affecting my system. And I was like, oh, it's the rice that's making me feel this way. And after doing this test, I learned it was carrots, because the dairy had impacted my system so much that I became intolerant to a couple things that would normally be healthy. And carrots was one of them. And every time I usually have rice, I also roast carrots. I don't know why I put the two together, but my kids love it. So I never put the two together because carrots, vitamin A, this is healthy. It was the carrots. And now I have rice again with meals and I have no problem because I stopped adding the carrot. So sometimes we will say it's one thing and then we later find out it's something else. I would never have known that because I would have been swearing off rice, which is hard because I love sushi. And,
Oh, yeah.
again, I thought sushi, the soy sauce, the things that they put in some of the soy sauces, I'm intolerant to. So I was having problems with that. And I was like, it's the rice again, but I love it so much,
Yeah.
and yeah, things like that. If you can target it and you're 100% sure, like I've eaten a bowl of rice and now I know it's this. I was never doing that. I was always mixing it with other things. You eat that one thing, but be aware sometimes it takes 24 to 48 hours before your body really has a response to, because it's working its way through your system. And depending on how your system's doing, it might be a while before you really know. And you're addressing it with, oh, it must have been this other thing I ate, even though it was something from 36 hours before.
Yeah, I think that, and it's important to remember that each one of us is different. So what works with one person is not necessarily going to work for somebody else. You may be sensitive to carrots and I may not.
Right. I know. Weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my last thing I want to share with you guys is more the things that we can be doing that have nothing to do with consumption or diffusing. And it is things like meditation and a gratitude practice and just some rituals and traditions that can be really helpful in our grief. So the guide, I know I led with all the things we can, in a sense, consume, but it has a wealth of other natural ways that we don't have to consume. So first we'll start with the gratitude practice. And I know this is really important to you as well, Christina, is that when we grieve, we're told often, we'll be grateful for what you have. We'll look at what you do have. We'll look at, and it's supposed to be like, look at the brighter side. But I actually really like to look at the storm clouds and the rainbow. So I always say, you can grieve and be grateful. Like you can have both. And I've started in my gratitude practice to put big things like my health, my family, and then little things like sidewalk chalk with my kids or the smell of baked cookies or, things that you have to become a child again to appreciate in the world. And it helps you to start to see those kind of magical moments like springtime dandelions, picking one up and just blowing the seeds out and just how that looks. As adults, we tend to pass by that really fast or let our kids do it. But when we stop and enjoy those moments again, we see the smaller things that we can be grateful for and enjoy. You can also write about the things that you can actually control. What are the things in my life right now I do have control over because it feels like there's so much I don't. So gratitude practices are really helpful in just going back to like grounding us, helping us see what's around us, and also saying, I'm also allowed to grieve. I'm also allowed to say, this sucks. I'm not happy. I wish this was here. I wish this person was here. And I also see these things that are. And it gives us that balance. The next thing I highly recommend is having some type of meditation or prayer practice that just makes you go within, because it's very easy for us to be out and doing things for other people or avoiding going within. So having some time, even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day. And I'm not the biggest fan of meditation where it's just clear your mind, don't think of anything. I really like guided meditations because I think in today's society where we like to be doing something, it helps us to feel like we're, visualize this or whatever. But I find our brains respond much better to that than just take deep breaths and don't think of anything. We actually need a little more guidance with it. So there's some great apps out there like Headspace where you can have something at nighttime. You can have something first thing in the morning. And it just helps you, especially with memory, with grief, to kind of get refocused. Where am I? What am I doing? Okay, yeah, I need to take care of this today.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in real quick and say something. So yes, this is again, everybody is different. So we all need different things, right? So somebody may say, well, I just need some quiet to be still. And for me, lately, that's what things look like. That's not been it's not been the jumping out factor in my entire life, but just lately that is what it looks like. So, but you may be in a place, like Katie said, where you need that guided practice, because often in grief, and a lot of times we talk about grief as it relates to the loss of a loved one, but we also talk about grief as, like she had mentioned before, like these rites of passage, going from even happy things that we look at, like getting married or having a baby. There is still like a little bit of loss of independence. There's this new thing that you're going into, so you're grieving leaving some things behind, or grieving the ability to transition well and not knowing exactly what things look like, and that's okay, and things look different, and sometimes we need that help, and it's okay to allow that help to come in, whether it's somebody who's supporting you, or like she said, by a guided meditation. Because a lot of times in grief, I find that people don't really know what it is that they need. It's very difficult. You're so consumed, so overwhelmed with all the things that you're feeling, that you don't know how to get out of it. So for somebody just to look at you and say, hey, do this, it's like, how do I do this?
Right. Yeah, that was an important thing to me when I was creating this guide, was because often we get lots of ideas, or we just feel super lost. And it was like, here's one place where there's all sorts of suggestions, and you kind of decide what rings true to you. Some people aren't going to be into the teas or the oils, but they'll be more mindful of what they eat, or they like the idea of the gratitude practice. Or I was going to add as well, like going and getting a massage for that self-care piece that we often don't take care of. Having rituals and traditions on anniversaries are important, whether it be planting something or visiting the gravesite, or let's say one of the life challenges is maybe like losing your job. On that year later, you might have a new job, you might be in a good place, but how beautiful to honor and respect the fact that the loss of the job is what gave you this opportunity for a new job. And having that reflection time, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and that goes along with that gratitude piece too. And a lot of people are not in a space where they feel like they can be going into that gratitude space.
Right.
However, I'm going to plug this in, and you tell me what you think. But I believe that, yes, you may not be ready, but at some point you have to make a choice to be ready and allow that piece to come in. And I know that could sound harsh, right?
No, I agree. I think anybody who's been in grief long enough can tell you there comes a point where you say, well, it's no longer the grief keeping me stuck here. It's me.
Mm-hmm.
It's me keeping me in this place. And so it's time for me to shift out of that negative loop and go, okay, let me look at the storm clouds and the rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see both. Yeah.
Yes.
And it does feel like a stretch sometimes, doesn't it? It's like, you want me to look at this rainbow, but look at those storm clouds. And so I always say, look at both. Why not?
It does sound like a far stretch, Katie, but let me say that one of my most favorite things ever in the world is after the rain. And you can say that literally, you can think about that figuratively. However, if you stand outside after a good storm, you will see how vibrant the colors are and how absolutely beautiful the thing is, the life, the nature, the flowers, everything it is around you outside. You can see how beautiful it is. So that I recently launched a friend of mine, her name is Alexa Bigwar, her podcast, and she has a book and everything called Sunshine After the Storm. And you hear a lot of phrases like this, where beauty from ashes and that kind of thing. But it's so true that if you allow the process, if you allow yourself to go through the process, you feel those emotions, you have a support system, you make that choice to move through things and to use your resources, whether it's the natural resources that we're talking about right now, or the support from your medical professionals and that kind of thing. You really can truly see that vibrance and that beauty that does come from the storm. And all you have to do is look outside after a literal storm to see God's handiwork. And I don't say this lightly, because I know that a lot of people can get frustrated when you speak shiny, happy things when they're grieving.
So the key, I think, to what you were just saying is the fact that the ashes have to happen. The storm has to occur. That fire for the phoenix to rise has to happen as well. We have to. It's not a optional thing. All of us in the world will have to go through some type of grief to be able to have that beauty and that growth. I can't think, I've tried as a grief healer to think, what are situations where someone would not ever experience grief in their life? And even the most Zen Buddhist experiences grief. We all, no matter how much we detach, will experience that. It's so in us physically to have a response when something ends, when something changes, when adjustment has to happen. So it's almost like lean into it so that the growth can happen. I love the quote, no mud, no lotus. You have to have that murky, dirty, to have this beautiful flower. And so it's the same. Storm clouds, you have to have rain for the rainbow, right? We have to have that piece as well. And that for me has been the most healing process of 2018 and 2019 was to go, a long time ago I said I wanted to live life to the fullest, and I have been, because it's the good and the bad. It's not just everything's great and I'm woo. It's experiencing all the emotions of life. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really powerful when you don't start in that place in grief. You get there much later when you do the grief work, when you sit with it and you continue to. I'm even a couple days ago, I finished a podcast episode on grief, and I sat down with my husband. I was like, I'm feeling it. Because when you talk about it, you bring it up in your energy space and you feel it again. You go, man, whew.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people aren't standing around saying, "Okay, come on, bring it on." Well, maybe some people are, but I don't know those people. But they're not they're not saying, "You know what?" In fact, most people that I meet who have experienced great tragedy and trauma, their go-to thing would be saying that I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy.
Right.
And
yeah.
But the caveat to that, I would say, is that when you do have it and you're able to move through it, there's something beautiful that happens to you. Yes, there is still pain. Yes, there is still sadness. And you may always feel that, it coming and ebbing and flowing throughout your lifespan. However, there is that great hold that I believe that the Lord gives us, that peace, that we are able to withstand the storm. And not only are we able to withstand the storm, but we are also to have our character grow and see and be open to things that we would have never been open to. The pure wisdom that would come from that. And I'm going to actually add this, and I hope that it does not upset anybody, but there's also joy in that end. So many people feel like there's no joy that can come from all of the terrible things, but I'm going to tell you, and my go-to Bible verse, God tells us that he wants us to experience his joy in the land of the living, and that is this land, that is earth. And so I just wanted to plug that. I love to plug that for people, because there's so many people that are hopeless. Yeah. And the worst thing I think that you can have is the lack of hope, because why would you go on? And so many people, find their end because of hopelessness. So
yeah.
Katie, do you have anything else that you would like to share with our audience as far as any kind of natural healing, any kind of words of encouragement for somebody who is going through a tough time right now? And it doesn't have to be the loss of a loved one. It doesn't have to be, grief as we see it, like, where you're crying all the time. Maybe you're going through, whatever it is that's hard. So
yeah. I think the best advice I could give is to allow yourself the space and the time to go through it, and allow other people to come alongside you who are safe. Mm-hmm. And whether that be a grief healer or counselor like myself, a pastor or support at your church, a friend who's been there. Often I found sometimes after my mom died, even acquaintances who'd been there, just having a coffee with them, just being able to share my story, hear their story, and sit together was so healing. And it was like, well, I don't even really know you, and then we don't have to spend any more time together, but this really served the purpose that it needed to. So when you start to go, hey, you know what, there is grief there I haven't faced. There's stuff I've been keeping myself busy from, so I didn't have to feel it. Do some time to reflect for yourself and balance it with some time of connecting with somebody where you can really talk about it as well.
Great advice. So one other thing, would you like to tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, so my website is Katie Rossler, and that's ROSSLER.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Katie Rossler. And we'll make sure that you've got the link for the guide too, if you find that these were really helpful and you want to learn some more in these different categories and some further things, you're able to access that.
It's amazing, and I have really enjoyed having you here on Faith Breathed Hope. For the rest of you who are out there listening, we hope that you continue to be blessed and bless others. We'll see you next time. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.